Jason Navarro stared at the polished mahogany table in the Human Resources conference room, the silence stretching into an uncomfortable hum. At 48 years old, Jason had dedicated 18 years to building the market strategy division from a chaotic afterthought into the most profitable branch of the entire firm. His crisp navy suit felt suddenly too tight around the collar. Across the table sat Julian, the head of Human Resources, whose forced smile betrayed the grim nature of their meeting. Julian cleared his throat, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses before delivering the blow. Silas, the chief executive officer, had decided the company needed a fresh perspective. The phrase hung in the air, hollow and dismissive. Silas wanted to pivot toward a younger demographic, and apparently, Jason was no longer the right face for the department he had built from the ground up. Julian continued, his tone overly sympathetic, explaining the restructuring. Jason was not being fired, which Julian presented as a tremendous favor. Instead, he was being reassigned to senior advisor, a title that sounded respectable but carried absolutely zero authority. The true insult came with the revelation of his replacement. Chloe Lawson, a 28-year-old who had started just 1 month prior, was stepping into the role of Director of Market Strategy. Chloe had a degree in digital engagement and exactly 0 years of experience in corporate acquisitions, yet she was being handed the keys to the kingdom. Jason kept his expression perfectly neutral, nodding slowly as Julian handed him the updated agreement. 18 years of loyalty were being traded for a vague advisory role to appease a trend-chasing chief executive. The humiliation was swift and highly visible. By the time Jason returned to his floor, his assistant had already begun packing his belongings into standard brown cardboard boxes. His sprawling corner office with its panoramic view of the city's skyline and shelves lined with industry awards was being cleared out for Chloe. Jason was directed to a small corner desk located just outside the supply room, a spot previously occupied by temporary interns. The desk was barely large enough to hold his dual monitors and a single family photograph. As he placed his favorite fountain pen into the shallow drawer, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. The entire floor had gone quiet, the usual hum of ringing phones and rapid typing replaced by hushed whispers and stolen glances. Sarah, the lead from the analytics team, walked by with a stack of quarterly reports, her eyes wide with shock. She stopped near his new desk, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the right words. Oliver, the head of the finance division, stood a few feet away, shaking his head in disbelief. They all knew Jason was the engine that drove their success. Seeing him relegated to a cramped desk while Chloe enthusiastically directed the facilities staff on where to place her imported abstract art in his former office felt like a bad dream. Jason offered Sarah and Oliver a tight, reassuring smile, silently communicating that they should return to their work before drawing unwanted attention from the new regime. The first staff meeting under Chloe's leadership occurred later that afternoon. The conference room was packed, the tension palpable as the team waited for their new director. Chloe arrived 10 minutes late, carrying an oversized iced coffee and an electronic tablet she seemed struggling to operate. She took the seat at the head of the table, a spot Jason had occupied for nearly 2 decades. Her presentation was flashy, filled with buzzwords like synergy, viral potential, and hyper-engagement, but it lacked any substantive understanding of their actual market share. The team exchanged uneasy glances, trying to follow her scattered logic as she discussed their upcoming quarterly goals. The breaking point arrived when Chloe pulled up a slide detailing their most crucial international accounts. She launched into a passionate speech about rebranding their approach for their top Italian distributor, a man who required the utmost respect and delicate handling. She mispronounced the client's name repeatedly, referring to him as Anthony instead of Antonio, and completely mangled his surname, Rossi. The room went dead silent. Antonio Rossi was known for his fierce pride and terrible temper. A single misstep like that during a pitch could cost the firm millions of dollars in revenue. Chloe smiled brightly, completely unaware of her monumental error, and asked if anyone had questions about the new dynamic strategy. Jason leaned forward, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. He gently corrected her, pronouncing Antonio Rossi with precise diction, and explained that Mr. Rossi preferred a traditional approach over aggressive modern marketing tactics. Jason elaborated on the specific history of their relationship, noting that a complete rebranding would likely insult the client and sever their 10-year partnership. Chloe's bright smile faltered, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of crimson. She gripped her electronic tablet tightly, her knuckles turning white. Instead of thanking him for saving her from a catastrophic mistake, Chloe chose to assert her new dominance. She told Jason, in a voice dripping with condescension, that while she appreciated his historical context, the company was moving forward, not backward, and she expected everyone, including senior advisors, to fully support her vision without public interruption. Returning to his cramped desk by the supply closet, Jason pulled his mobile phone from his pocket. He stared at the screen for a long moment before opening his messages. He typed a brief message to his daughter, Maya, who was currently finishing her final year of law school. He told her about the morning meeting with Julian, the demotion to a meaningless role, and Chloe taking his office. He did not let his anger show in the text, simply stating the facts. Maya replied almost immediately, her protective nature flaring up. She sent a single, decisive sentence instructing him to execute the contingency plan they had discussed over dinner 3 months ago. Jason set the phone face down on his desk and leaned back in his standard-issue mesh chair. He looked toward his old office, watching through the glass walls as Chloe animatedly talked on her phone, completely oblivious to the intricate machinery of the department she now supposedly ran. Silas and Julian had made a massive miscalculation. They assumed Jason would quietly accept his new role, fade into the background, and eventually resign in defeat, leaving their shiny corporate image intact. They did not understand the depth of his strategic mind or the loyalty he commanded from key players in the industry. Jason took a slow, deep breath, letting the day's humiliation wash over him and settle into a cold, hard resolve. He would not throw a tantrum, and he certainly would not quit. He was going to sit at this small desk, play the long game, and watch Chloe dismantle herself while he prepared his ultimate exit. The morning air inside the office felt distinctly different now. The atmosphere had shifted from collaborative warmth to a rigid tension. Chloe wasted no time implementing her vision for the agency, relying entirely on spreadsheets, standardized forms, and algorithmic efficiency. She called it modernization, but to Jason, it looked like the systematic dismantling of everything that made their firm special. Jason sat at his new corner desk, watching the chaos unfold. It was positioned awkwardly near the supply closet, far away from the natural light. His approach had always been rooted in deep, personal connections. He knew his clients, their families, and precisely how they preferred their coffee during morning meetings. Chloe saw these relationships as inefficient variables. Her first major mandate was the introduction of client intake forms. These were 20-page documents asking for quantitative metrics, projected growth models, and standardized demographic breakdowns. She insisted that every client complete one. The pushback was immediate. Evelyn Montgomery, a matriarch of a century-old textile company, called him an absolute exasperation after receiving the automated email. Jason spent 45 minutes on the phone with her, apologizing for the impersonal nature of the request. He promised her she did not need to fill out the form, assuring her that he already had everything they needed. When Chloe found out about this exception, she marched over to Jason's desk. She stood over him, her expression tight and uncompromising. She demanded that Jason hand over all his client files and personal notes. She wanted everything digitized, categorized, and uploaded to the new central server by the end of the day. Jason agreed to provide the notes, but what he uploaded was nothing more than the bare minimum. He provided contact information, basic transaction histories, and standard project outlines. The true essence of his work, the nuanced insights into the fears and aspirations of his clients, remained securely locked inside his head. He knew that if he surrendered that information, he would surrender the only leverage he had left. The real test of Chloe's new system came a week later with the Rossi Corporation. Antonio Rossi was a formidable figure in the real estate development world, valuing intuition, personal trust, and a firm handshake above all else. His account was the largest the agency handled. Chloe insisted on leading the pitch for Rossi's new luxury waterfront development. When the day of the presentation arrived, Chloe stood before a massive screen, clicking through slide after slide of intricate graphs, projected market saturation indexes, and standardized demographic trajectories. Jason sat quietly at the back of the room, watching Antonio Rossi's face. The older man shifted in his seat, growing visibly irritated. He did not care about algorithms or theoretical market saturation. He cared about legacy and how the development would make people feel. Chloe's presentation possessed zero emotion. It was a cold, calculated machine that completely missed the heart of the Rossi brand. Before Chloe could finish her concluding slide, Antonio stood up. He slammed his hand flat on the polished mahogany table, declaring the proposal an insult to his family's name and a complete waste of his valuable time. He stated unequivocally that he would be taking his entire portfolio to a competitor by the end of the week. Panic erupted the moment Antonio stormed out of the room. Silas suddenly looked terrified. Losing the Rossi account would be catastrophic and likely trigger layoffs. Silas turned to Jason, desperation masking his usual arrogance. He ordered Jason to fix it, telling him to do whatever it took to keep Antonio Rossi from walking out the front door forever. Jason nodded slowly, buttoned his jacket, and left the conference room. He knew exactly where Antonio was going. There was a small, quiet Italian cafe exactly 3 blocks away, tucked away from the main street. It was the only place Antonio ever went to calm down after a severely stressful business meeting. Jason walked there briskly. He found the older man sitting alone at a secluded corner table, staring angrily at a double espresso. Jason did not bring any spreadsheets or projected revenue graphs. He simply pulled out the opposite chair, sat down, and offered a genuine apology. He possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of what Antonio truly wanted. He spent the next 2 hours talking quietly with Antonio about the rich history of the waterfront district. They discussed the specific architectural nuances that would properly honor his father's original vision. He spoke to Antonio not as a mere data point, but as a visionary builder. By the time they finished their coffees, the crisis was averted. Antonio agreed to stay with the agency, but only on the explicit condition that Jason remained in complete control of his account. When Jason returned to the office, Silas greeted him at the door, visibly sweating. Jason calmly informed him that the Rossi account was secure. Silas let out a massive sigh of relief, patted Jason on the shoulder, muttered a quick word of thanks, and immediately told him to go back to his corner desk. There was no public acknowledgement, no restoration of his title, and no apology. Chloe stood nearby, her face pale with fury. She glared at Jason, convinced that he had somehow orchestrated the entire failure to make her look incompetent. She believed he had sabotaged her presentation behind her back. Sitting back at his small desk near the closet, the reality of his situation crystallized in Jason's mind. Silas had no intention of recognizing his value. Silas was simply using him as an insurance policy, a safety net to keep the firm afloat until Chloe could figure out how to operate without him. A quiet resolve settled over him. He realized that loyalty to a company that did not value him was a fool's errand. He had built the relationships. He had fostered the trust. If Silas and Chloe wanted to run a sterilized, algorithmic machine, they could do it without him. Jason slowly opened a blank document on his computer. He did not type anything about standardized forms or data metrics. Instead, he began to draft a list of names. It was a list of his most trusted colleagues and the clients who would follow him anywhere. The time for quietly enduring the disrespect was over. He was not just going to leave, he was going to take the heart of the agency with him. The atmosphere inside the agency had grown toxic, heavy with the oppressive weight of Chloe's relentless micromanagement and her deeply flawed standardized processes. The vibrant hum of creative collaboration had been replaced by a stifling silence, broken only by the frantic clicking of keyboards as the team scrambled to meet impossible deadlines. Chloe's insistence on stripping away all personalization from client campaigns in favor of cold templates proved disastrous. Within a single month, client satisfaction scores plummeted. The breaking point arrived when 3 long-standing clients abruptly terminated their lucrative contracts, citing a sudden decline in quality. Sarah and Oliver, once the most energetic members of the creative team, were utterly miserable. They walked through the office with slumped shoulders and hollow eyes, their passion completely drained. Adding to the chaos, Chloe forced the team to adopt an unproven project management software system. She claimed it would streamline operations, but the reality was a complete nightmare. The software was riddled with bugs. During the mandatory migration process, years of crucial client data simply vanished. When Sarah tearfully informed Chloe that an irreplaceable portfolio of assets had been permanently deleted, Chloe stubbornly refused to accept responsibility. Instead, she doubled down, strictly forbidding anyone from reverting to reliable systems. The devastating data loss caused severe delays and further eroded trust. The consequences of Chloe's disastrous leadership came to a head at the quarterly review meeting. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense as Silas sat rigidly at the head of the table, his face a thunderous mask of displeasure. Chloe stood unsteadily at the front of the room, her usual arrogance completely replaced by nervous energy. She fumbled with the projector remote, her hands shaking as she managed to display the first slide. It was an unmitigated disaster. The downward trending charts painted a grim picture. Chloe desperately tried to spin the dismal numbers using corporate jargon, but Silas aggressively cut through her excuses and demanded the bottom line. Chloe, her voice trembling, admitted that overall agency revenue was down by 37%. Silas exploded. He slammed his closed fist violently onto the polished table, the cracking sound echoing loudly across the silent room. He demanded to know how such a catastrophic failure had occurred under her supervision. Cornered and desperate, Chloe deflected the blame onto someone else. She pointed a trembling finger directly at Jason, who was sitting quietly at the far end of the table. She loudly accused Jason of deliberately sabotaging her implementation efforts, falsely claiming he had selfishly refused to share his vast institutional knowledge and had actively undermined her authority. Jason simply watched her unravel, his calm expression unreadable, refusing to engage in her pathetic display. Silas, however, was desperately looking for a convenient scapegoat and an immediate quick fix. He turned his blazing anger entirely toward Jason, ignoring Chloe's frantic babbling. Silas informed Jason in a threatening tone that the agency was on the verge of losing the Evelyn Montgomery account, a keystone client that reliably generated $3 million in annual revenue. Silas made it abundantly clear that if Evelyn walked away, he would hold Jason personally responsible. He ordered Jason to meet with Evelyn immediately, commanding him to do whatever was necessary to salvage the relationship. It was an impossible task, a desperate maneuver to save the agency's sinking bottom line, but Jason simply nodded his head once. The following afternoon, Jason drove out to Evelyn Montgomery's sprawling estate located on the quiet outskirts of the city. Evelyn was a formidable businesswoman, remarkably sharp and completely unforgiving of mediocrity. She graciously welcomed Jason into her elegant conservatory, getting straight down to business. She told Jason plainly that she had noticed the unacceptable decline in the agency's creative work, and that she was preparing to move all her lucrative business elsewhere. Jason did not try to offer any empty promises or falsely defend the agency's cascade of failures. Instead, he spoke honestly about the detrimental structural changes and the lack of creative freedom. Evelyn listened intently, her piercing gaze never leaving his face. She saw right through Silas's transparent maneuver. Evelyn slowly set her delicate porcelain teacup down onto the small glass table with a quiet clink. She told Jason in a firm voice that she had always deeply valued his brilliant strategic mind and his personal dedication to her brand. She stated unequivocally that she had no interest in continuing to work with a failing company run by people like Silas and Chloe. However, she then offered Jason a stunning ultimatum. She promised him that if Jason were to take the leap and start his own independent firm, she would immediately transfer her $3 million account directly to him. The incredible offer hung in the quiet air. In that precise moment, the final pieces clicked into place for Jason. He realized with absolute clarity that he no longer needed to tolerate the toxic environment. He recognized that he already possessed the necessary expertise to build something incredible of his own. While Jason was securing his bright new future, Chloe was back at the dreary office, rapidly spiraling into a state of sheer panic. The disastrous results of the quarterly review meeting had left her job hanging by a thread, and she knew that if she did not somehow produce a major win immediately, Silas would ruthlessly fire her before the week was out. Blind desperation clouded her usually sharp judgment, violently pushing her to cross a massive ethical and legal line she could never uncross. Frantically searching through the shared files, she found an unsigned draft of a long-term binding contract extension for the Rossi Corporation, a massive international client that Jason had meticulously managed for several years. Knowing perfectly well that the skeptical executives at Rossi only trusted Jason, Chloe made a fateful, deeply criminal decision. With a violently trembling hand and cold sweat breaking out across her forehead, she deliberately forged Jason's signature on the bottom line of the critical document, finalizing a deal that would artificially inflate her dismal retention metrics. She filed the illegally forged contract away, desperately trying to convince herself that this act was the only possible way left to save herself from professional ruin. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Jason's office, casting pale shadows across his mahogany desk. It was Tuesday, typically reserved for quiet strategy sessions, but the ring of his private line shattered the calm. He reached for the receiver, expecting a routine update, but the voice belonged to Antonio Rossi. The billionaire logistics magnate sounded agitated, his accent clipping his words with confusion and betrayal. Rossi demanded to know why Jason had suddenly agreed to the aggressive new restructuring terms they had explicitly rejected during their dinner just 2 nights prior. Jason felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He kept his voice steady, projecting complete control, and calmly assured Rossi that there must be a clerical misunderstanding. He asked Rossi to forward the finalized document that had just been transmitted to his legal team. When the call ended, Jason sat in stunned silence, waiting for the email notification. When the email arrived, Jason opened the file with grim inevitability. It was the master service agreement for the Rossi account, spanning over 100 pages of dense legalese. He scrolled rapidly to the final page, scanning past boilerplate clauses until they locked onto the signature line. There, rendered in digital ink but unmistakably attempting to mimic his distinct flourish, was his signature. It was a good forgery, good enough to fool a distracted client, but Jason knew every loop and jagged angle of his handwriting. Someone had taken a high-resolution scan of an older document and overlaid it onto this unauthorized contract. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Chloe had actually done it. She had crossed the line from ruthless ambition to outright criminality. Creating or altering a document with the intent to defraud fell squarely under California Penal Code Section 470. This was not just unethical corporate maneuvering. It was a felony offense, punishable by up to 3 years in a state penitentiary. The shock of Chloe's brazen act was quickly followed by a darker realization. Chloe was fiercely ambitious, but she was calculating when it came to her own skin. She would never expose herself to a forgery charge without top cover. Jason leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the quiet office. Silas had to know. The managing partner had been desperate to lock in the Rossi account before the end of the fiscal quarter. Silas had the authority, the motive, and the moral flexibility to sanction this extreme measure. Jason needed proof. He spent the next 4 hours methodically navigating the internal network. Using the administrative privileges he had retained from his time, overseeing the transition 2 years ago, he began to trace the digital footprints surrounding the Rossi file. He found the time-stamped access logs for the master contract repository. He saw that Chloe had accessed the file at 11 o'clock the previous night. More importantly, he found a deleted but still recoverable email thread in the secure archive. It was a brief exchange between Chloe and Silas. Chloe had expressed hesitation about finalizing the terms without Jason's physical sign-off, and Silas had replied with a chilling directive, instructing her to do whatever was necessary to close the deal by morning and explicitly stating that he would handle any fallout. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Jason had the power to march into Silas's corner office, throw the printed emails onto his desk, and demand immediate termination for Chloe. The anger boiled within him, demanding immediate confrontation, but the cold, analytical side of his brain urged restraint. Confronting them now would only give them time to destroy evidence or attempt to frame him for the oversight. He needed to be surgical. He needed to ensure their complete and total destruction, not just a momentary victory. Jason carefully copied every file, every server log, and every email thread onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. He placed one in his pocket, locked the second in his personal safe, and planned to mail the third to his private post office box. With the explosive evidence securely in his possession, Jason turned his attention to the future. His own firm, which had been a quiet side project for 6 months, now needed to become a reality with immediate urgency. He finalized the lease agreement for a sleek office space in the financial district, choosing a location just 3 blocks away from his current employer. The infrastructure was in place, but a firm was nothing without its talent. As evening approached and the office emptied, Jason invited Sarah and Oliver for a drink at a discreet speakeasy across town. Seated in a private booth, insulated by the low hum of jazz, Jason laid out his plan. He did not burden them with the full details of the forgery just yet. Instead, he painted a picture of a new enterprise built on transparency and ethical advocacy. Sarah, a brilliant tactician passed over for promotion twice by Silas, barely hesitated. Her eyes gleamed with the prospect of true autonomy. Oliver, typically more cautious, took a long sip of his bourbon before nodding slowly. He knew that staying under the toxic leadership of Silas and Chloe was a guaranteed path to burnout. By the time they ordered their second round, both Sarah and Oliver had agreed to draft their resignation letters. Perfectly timed to coincide with Jason's departure, the final piece of the puzzle involved the clients. Jason knew bringing down Silas and Chloe would mean nothing if he walked away empty-handed. Over the next 2 days, he scheduled private breakfasts with both Antonio Rossi and Arthur Montgomery. He met Rossi at a quiet cafe near the waterfront, far away from the corporate listening posts. Jason revealed the truth about the forged contract, sliding a copy of the actual document across the table alongside the proof of the unauthorized signature. Rossi's initial anger transformed into a calculated respect for Jason's integrity and strategic patience. The billionaire promised that the moment Jason severed ties with the firm, the Rossi logistics empire would follow him. A similar meeting with Montgomery yielded the same result. The eccentric tech mogul was appalled by the breach of trust and immediately pledged his entire portfolio to Jason's new venture. The trap was set. Jason had the evidence, the team, and the cornerstone clients. All that remained was to light the match and watch the corrupt empire Silas had built burn to the ground. The air in the corner office was thick with the scent of expensive leather and stale espresso. Jason stood before the massive mahogany desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes completely focused. Silas sat across from him, leaning back in his high-backed chair, tapping a gold pen against a crystal paperweight. Chloe sat on the leather sofa to the side, her legs crossed and a smug expression resting on her face. She held a tablet, pretending to review quarterly projections, but her attention was entirely fixed on the interaction before them. Jason reached into his briefcase and slowly withdrew a crisp white envelope. He placed it precisely in the center of the mahogany desk. "I am submitting my resignation," Jason said. His voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of the anxiety Silas had expected to hear. Silas stopped tapping his pen. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. He let out a sharp laugh. "You are quitting now? That is incredibly foolish, Jason. You signed a contract." Chloe smirked. "He probably forgot about the non-compete clause," she chimed in, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "It is going to be very difficult for you to find work anywhere, Jason." Silas leaned forward. "She is right. Your contract clearly states you cannot work for any competitor, nor can you start your own firm. If you attempt to walk out that door, our legal team will sue you into bankruptcy. You will be blacklisted, ruined, and begging for a junior position in some small town." Jason did not flinch. "You are mistaken," Jason began, his tone almost conversational. "First of all, your non-compete clause is completely unenforceable. I suggest you consult your legal team regarding California Business and Professions Code Section 16600. It clearly states that every contract by which anyone is restrained from engaging in a lawful profession is void. Your threat of bankrupting me is entirely hollow. I am completely free to start my own firm and take whatever clients wish to follow me." Silas waved a dismissive hand. "We have enough resources to keep you tied up in litigation for years." "Perhaps," Jason replied, "but there is a much more significant issue at hand." Jason reached into his briefcase a second time. This time he pulled out a thick folder and extracted several documents. He laid the first document in front of Silas and handed a copy directly to Chloe. "What is this nonsense?" Silas demanded, snatching the paper. Chloe glanced at her copy, and all the color instantly drained from her face. Her smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. "That," Jason said, "is irrefutable evidence of a violation of California Penal Code Section 470, forgery. I have spent the last 3 weeks meticulously tracing the origins of the allegedly modified client contracts. I found the original drafts, the digital footprints of the alterations, and the exact timestamps of when the forged signatures were applied." Silas stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "I recovered the deleted emails between the two of you discussing how to frame me," Jason continued. "I have the metadata proving that the fraudulent amendments were created on your personal laptop, Silas, and then transferred to the corporate server. It is a very thorough, complete trail of evidence." "You hacked my laptop?" Silas sputtered. "That is illegal." "I did not hack anything," Jason corrected calmly. "You used the company network, which means the corporate security server logged every packet of data. Everything I have gathered was obtained legally. You two are facing multiple counts of felony forgery and conspiracy." Chloe finally found her voice. "Jason, please, we can talk about this. We can give you whatever you want. Just do not do this. It is entirely too late for negotiations," Jason said. "I have already sent the entire dossier to the corporate board of directors. Furthermore, a complete package of evidence has been securely transmitted to the authorities. They are extremely interested in your business practices." Silas collapsed back into his chair, looking suddenly very old. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by suffocating dread. "You have destroyed us," Silas whispered. "You destroyed yourselves," Jason corrected. "I suggest you both call your defense attorneys immediately." Without another word, Jason turned and walked out of the office. He strode down the long corridor, feeling a profound sense of lightness. Within 48 hours, the fallout was absolute. The board convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to terminate Silas. He was escorted from the building by private security. Chloe was fired simultaneously and arrested at her luxury apartment on charges of felony forgery. The massive fines levied against Silas decimated his personal wealth, forcing him to liquidate his assets. Jason wasted no time. He finalized the lease on a bright modern office space and launched his own independent consulting firm. When the news of the scandal broke, his former clients were appalled by Silas and his illegal actions. They immediately sought Jason out, respecting his integrity and expertise. Within 2 weeks, Jason had secured the top-tier accounts that had previously formed the backbone of his old firm. He was his own boss, completely free from the manipulation he had endured. A month later, Jason sat at a secluded table in a high-end downtown restaurant. Soft jazz played in the background, and the warm glow of candlelight illuminated the faces of the patrons. Across from him sat Maya, her eyes sparkling with joy and admiration. She raised her glass of vintage champagne. "To new beginnings," Maya said, a bright smile lighting up her face. "And to the most brilliant, perfectly executed plan I have ever witnessed. I am incredibly proud of you, Jason." Jason smiled, raising his own glass to meet hers. "Thank you, Maya, for believing in me and for standing by me when things looked impossible. I could not have done this without your support." He took a sip of the champagne, savoring the crisp taste. He looked around the elegant restaurant, then back to the woman he loved. The dark clouds of the past were completely gone, replaced by a bright, limitless horizon. He had faced down corruption, outsmarted his tormentors, and built something entirely his own. The revenge was sweet, but the freedom was even sweeter. They enjoyed the rest of their celebratory dinner, talking animatedly about the future, completely untouched by the shadows they had left behind.